This is Gemara in Kesubos, Daf Yomi, and all the learning for this month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored as lezchot neshama for Esther, Reyzel, Basra, Mair, and Mirtashem. The learning of the entire Chabura, daf by daf, day by day, should bring Esther, Reyzel, Basra, and Mair in this auspicious month of Elul to higher in place in Gan Eden Shalmaila, and should be a Milat Sheshar for the entire family. We pick it up on the bottom of Nundaladim and Bees. Excuse me. We are 6 lines to the bottom, quoting the words in the Mishnah. The Mishnah that we learned yesterday, the Mishnah taught us primarily about the din of Tosefes Ksuba. Yesterday we began this parak, the parak Afal Pi, in which the parak began by discussing that, of course, we know that there's the root, the main part of the Ksuba, the 200 for a Basula, the 100 for Almanha. But the Mishnah began by discussing that if someone wants to add on to that basic amount, even Meya Mana, he is allowed to. And today we begin, and the Gemara hones in on this interesting word of Ratza. If he wants to add on, what is the Mishnah teaching us with this interesting word? So says the Gemara, Ratza lichtayv la loika tani. The Mishnah did not say if he wants to write to her. The Mishnah said if he wants to add on. So why didn't the Mishnah use the more normal terminology of Ratza Lichtayv? If he wants to write into the Ksuba, he could add on what he wants. So says the Gemara from the wording of the Mishnah, the fact that it says Ratza Lehaisif to add on, and not Ratza Lichtayv, Mesaili Rav Yevu Amar Rav Yanai Zaraya. To Rav Yevu in the name of Rav Yanai, Dam Rav Yevu Amar Rav Yanai. Tenai Ksuba, Kiksuba Dami. An incredible concept that we're going to elaborate upon today, that the Tenai of the Ksuba, that which you add on, as Rashi points out, about 15 lines into the narrow line, says Rashi, the Tosefes, that which you add on to the Ksuba is considered part and parcel, is considered the Ksuba himself. And from the fact that the Mishnah did not say lichtayv, which would connote that you're coming to add on something new, it's a separate matana, but rather the fact that it said if you want to add on, says Rav Yevu Amar Rav Yanai, and explains the Gemara that our Mishnah corroborates this point, that the mechanics, that the way to learn that if someone wants to add on to the basic ksuba is not that it's a separate matana, a separate present that he's giving to his wife, but rather it's intrinsic within the ksuba itself, that it's considered as if it is the ksuba itself. Tonight ksuba is ksuba dami. Now who cares? Says the Gemara, very nice, but what's the difference if it's considered intrinsic? What's the difference if it's considered that you're adding on something separate? Says the Gemara, nafkamina, there is no less than 14 ramifications to this din. Says the Gemara, number 1, limay cheres, a woman who sells her ksuba. We're not going to go through every one, but just the first 2, limay cheres, ulimay cheles, a woman who sells or forgives her ksuba. So Rashi explains over here, machla umachra es akol, lefisha akol kari ksuba. If a woman goes and she sells her ksuba, or she says to her husband, I'm forgiving it, is she only selling and forgiving the root, the base, the automatic 100 or 200 of the ksuba, or is she even selling and forgiving that which is added on? So says the Gemara, a practical difference in the fact that we're considering the Tanai ksuba, the Tosefes ksuba, the additions that are written into the ksuba when one gets married as if it is the ksuba itself, is to teach you that if she sells or forgives it, it is all sold and forgiven, even the additional. Similarly, limay redes, similarly a din that we're going to learn in about 10 blat, that if someone rebels at her husband, the halacha is that we detract from her ksuba. Says the Gemara, the additions in the ksuba are considered part of the ksuba with regard to this din. Ulapay gemes, and similarly, someone who is paigim, someone who damages her ksuba, this is going to be later on, and each one of these dinim we're going to discuss separately. This is referring to if a woman admits that she already receives partial payment. So says the Gemara, the Tosefes is part of that as well. L'tevas, similarly a woman who demands her ksuba. Uleveres aldas, a woman who transgresses the halachas, transgresses the halachas of Moshe. So look at the bottom Rashi. Rashi points out this is referring to that the basic ksuba is not just the 1 on 200, but even the additional if she goes, and as we'll see, she walks outside with her hair uncovered, etc., that's even considered in the Taisefes. And we move on now to Nun Hey Amud Aleph, that the Gemara continues listing number 7, nafkamina ramification that we consider the Taisefes as if the ksuba itself, l'shevach, with regard to a shavua for the appreciation, if the land in the ksuba appreciates in value, l'shvua, with regard to swearing, l'shvius, regarding to halachas of Shemitah, in order, and to halacha if she writes over all the possessions to her sons, ligvais mina akarka, that which she collects in the karka, mina ziburius, that which she collects in the inferior land, v'chol zman she bebeis aviyah, the halacha that as long as she's in her father's house, what she gets supported from, uliksubis bin indirchan, the halacha that we just learned a few days ago, that we write that her male sons always get part of the ksuba. All of these halachas, with regard to all these halachas, the Taisefes, that which is added on to the ksuba, is considered the ksuba itself. Continues the Gemara, once we're on the topic, Itmar. 4 lines on the topic, and then Hey Amud Aleph says the Gemara, Ksubas bin indichrin. With regard to this Ksubas bin indichrin, in which we spoke out already, is the part in which her sons inherit that part of the Ksuba. Says the Gemara, Pombadisa Amri, and Pombadisa they say, Lo tarfi mimeshabdi. This part, this special takana that the male sons inherit their mother's Ksuba in the event that she were to die and after the father were to die, says in Bombadisa, you do not collect it from Mishubadim, you do not collect it from encumbered properties. If the father sold land, you do not collect Ksuba from that. Why? Because Yartun Tanan. The Mishnah, back on the Beis and Beis, when it said the din of Kesubos ben Indirchon, it said Yartun. It called it a Yartun, which is a Yerusha, which is an inheritance. And because we're referring to the halachas of Kesubos ben Indirchon as an inheritance, as the Gemara, it has the halachas of the inheritance. And one of the halachas of an inheritance are that you do not collect it from Mishubadim, you do not collect it from fields that the father had sold. Whereas they argue tarfim mishav, they say you yes collect. Why? Because they say yasvin tanan. Because there's a different Mishnah that says and calls it yasvin. Actually, it's the same Mishnah that's further on in the Mishnah that yasvin is a form of taking, like the word of likuchen, of buying, and therefore the Mishnah refers to as a purchase. And just like all other purchases, you yes collect from mishubadim, so to this din. So machlekes pombadisa b'nei masim yachasya. This is the first of 4 machlekesim that we're going to see between pombadisa and b'nei masim yachasya, in which the Gemara is telling us whether Kesubos ben Indirchon is collected from Mishubadim or not. And says the Gemara, Ve'olchasa, lo tarfi mishabdi, the halacha is like Pombadisa. Why? Because Yartan Tanan, because the Mishnah says that Yartan calling it a Yerusha. And now machlekes number 2 between Pombadisa and Bnei Masim Yechasya, metaltali v'esnayu beinayu. In the event, metaltlin, which of course are movable items, all non-land items, which are designated for payment of the ksuba, and after the husband dies, the wife comes to collect the ksuba, and the metaltlin, whatever he designated, his car, his watch, any other items, are still intact. So says the Gemara, if she is coming to collect these items from from her husband's estate, and the items are there, then below shvua, she's able to collect without making a shvua. But lesnayu beinayu, if the items are no longer around and she wants to collect from them, that's a machlokes. But b'tisa amri below shvua b'nei masmechasi amri b'shvua. A machlokes if you have to make a shvua. Now, what does this machlokes center upon? This machlokes centers upon that any time we have metaltlin, Rashi on the first wide line, we'll read together. Rashi says that if the husband designates metaltlin for his wife's ksuba, if the metaltlin, if those items are still here, then we assume that is srariya tafsei. That is the bundle, that is the metaltlin, that is the items that the husband designated. So there's no reason to assume there's anything else. And therefore she's able to collect from it without a shvua. But if lesnayu beinayu, if she comes in and says, I want the car, I want the computer, I want the watch, all the metaltlin that my husband left, but we don't have those items, then it's a machlekes whether she indeed has to make a shvua, whether we are chayshish that there were other items that the husband set aside and she already was paid or not. Says the Gemara, shvua, the halacha is she could collect without making a shvua. And the third case of this machlekes b'medisa meimas mechasya is yachid lo ara ba'arba mitzarnaha. Let's say the husband designated her a piece of land to collect from the ksuba, and he wrote and he said the 4 boundaries, clearly marking which field she should collect from. Says the Gemara, if that is the scenario, then below shvuah she does not have to swear in order to collect that land. And this, of course, is the case in which the husband dies. But b'chad mitzvah, if there was only one boundary listed, so we don't know exactly where the field is, then that is a machlekes whether indeed she has to swear. Says the Gemara, again, we pass it like Bombadisa, she does not have to make a shvuah. And the fourth and final case between B'nai Mas and Mechasya and the B'nai Bombadisa, in reality, has nothing to do with Ksuba, but rather it's a case of Amr La'edim Kesubos Chasmu V'Havi Lei. Says the person to Edim, write Kisvu, Chasmu, sign the document, V'Havu Lei, and give it to a certain person. So what's the halacha? If someone tells the Edim to write and sign and give away this item, so says the Gemara, Kanu Mine, this is about 12 lines to the bottom, the first line is Kanu. If the Edim made a kinyan with the donor, with the person giving away this item, Lo tzarich hamlu chebei. If they made a kinyan with him, they don't have to ask him anymore. If Reuven tells the Edim, please write and sign and give away this field, the Edim say no problem. The Edim make a kinyan, they do a kinyan sadar, they take off a handkerchief, they take off their yarmulke, and they give it to the donor, and they say make a kinyan on the person's behalf. Lo tzarich lamlu chebei. You do not have to ask him afterwards, and rather the Edim are allowed to do that which they wrote, and allowed to give away that item. But let's say they did not make a kinyan. That's again a machlekes. And this one we pass like b'nei mas mechasya. That indeed, if you did not make a kinyan, and the edim have to consult and ask with the donor, which of course the novelty, the chiddush being, even though the donor said write it and sign it and give it away, still because they didn't make a kinyan, they have to confirm with him before they give it away. And we continue today's share with 8 lines to the bottom, quoting the Mishnah, the Rav Elazar ben Azariah. And this was a point of contesting, a point of machlekes, as we'll turn back just to see the Mishnah, which was a machlekes Tanakama and Rav Elazar ben Azariah, with regard to this Isafa, this added part of the Kesuba. What is the halacha if this woman gets divorced or her husband dies? What does she collect? Does she collect the extra? So the Tanakama said, regardless whether it's Erisin or Asuin, if they just started the marriage or they consummated the marriage, says the Tanakama, she collects every single item that the husband wrote into the Ksuba. Whereas husband Azariah Omer, no. If they consummated the marriage, they did in Misuin, then yes, she collects everything. But if they only did Erisin, then she's only able to collect the root 200 for a Misuan and 100 for an Almana. So says the Gemara on this din, on this machlekes of husband Azariah and the Chachamim, Itmar, says the Gemara, Rav Nasan, it's machlekes Rav and Rav Nasan. Chadam are lachi v'laz ben Azariah, v'chadam are ena lachi v'laz ben Azariah. Machlekes, do we indeed paskin like v'laz ben Azariah that you only get the excess in the case of Nisuim? Says the Gemara, where does this machlekes stem from? Tistayim de Rav Nasan udamar lachi v'laz ben Azariah. Let's bring a raya. That Rav Nasan is the Shita, is the opinion that holds like of Lazim and Azariah, which as we're going to see in a moment is why Deshami Lei says the Gemara Rav Nasan the Azal Basar Amdana. Because where did Rav Elazar ben Azariah's didn't come from that you do not give it over the excess, the Taisefes, if it's only Erisin? Explains the Gemara, you know where it came from? It came from an Umdana. It came that we went into the mindset of the husband and we said, wait, why are you writing $1 million in the Ksuba? Why are you writing such a Taisefes? It must be because you want to get married. It must be that when you consummate the marriage, you want her to have all this money. So says the Gemara, that is the opinion of Rav Nasan, who says we go after an umdana, that we assess the das, the mindset of a person, and we paskin based upon that. So the Gemara tries to prove that Rav Nasan is the opinion of Rav Elazar ben Azariah in our Mishnah, that you only do that which we assume he wanted, we go basar umdana, we evaluate and assess why he made such a condition. And explains the Gemara, Damar Rav Nasan in the last line, Halacha, Rav Shimon Shizuri, that we possibly Rav Shimon Shizuri b'Misukan. With regard to the case of Misukan, what is the case of Misukan? The last Rashi over here quotes the Gemara in Gittin that says, if someone goes overseas and tries to write a get to his wife, we basically decide, we go into his das and we figure out, is this a get that he would have wanted or not? As we see the last Rashi over here, the Rashi says, if Shimon Shazuri says, Mesukan HaGoisis, Basar Omdon Daito, we go after that which he wants, and we say that what's the reason he must have said it? He's not trying to joke around with his wife. He wants her to be divorced in the event that he does not come home. And we turn over the page, and the Gemara points out a second halacha there of Nasan Basik, like of Shimon Jazuri, is Bichumas Meiser Shal Demai. This halacha of Chumas Meiser Shal Demai has nothing to do with assessing and evaluating the das of the person. This is just a second time there of Nasan Basik, like of Shimon Jazuri. Just quickly to point out, what is this Chumas Meiser of Demai? This is a halacha that, of course, you have to give Meiser, you have to give Truma to the Kayin, and then you have to give Meiser to the Levi, 1/10, and then the Levi takes a 10th and gives it to a Kayin. That last 10th is called Chumas Meiser. Now, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the Ramaratzim, who didn't necessarily do that which we just said, give the 10th and the 10th, and therefore all their items were considered Demai. Damai, we don't know what it is. And based upon that, if you ever get an item from Ma'aretz, halacha was you to re-separate the above aforementioned Truma and Meisers, etc. So what happens if the Truma Meiser, if that 10th that the Levi wants to give to the Kohen gets mixed together with the rest of the items? Now you're messed up, now there's nothing you could do, and you have to sell it to a Kohen. So that halacha of Shimon Shazuri Paskins, that we would believe that Ma'aretz, if we ask him and he says he remembers if he took a Meiser or not. But again, that's a sidebar. Then the point that we're bringing out is that Rav Nasan Paskins, like Rav Shimon Shazuri, which goes basar, which goes after the umdana, we evaluate his mindset whether he would want to do something or not. And that's how the Gemara wants to prove that Rav Nasan is the opinion of Elazar ben Azariah in our Mishnah. Asks the Gemara, really? V'rav lo yazal basar umdana? You're telling me that Rav Nasan goes basar umdana, but that means that Rav does not. But we learned matana shchivan rachikasaba kinyin. Bebei Rav Mishmei Rav Amri. If you have Matana Shchimra, someone on their deathbed that writes away a gift, they learned in the yeshiva of Rav. Of course, the operative person that we're looking for here is Rav. That what? Arkavei Atrei Rachshi. That's considered shredding on two sides. We'll see in a moment what that means. Whereas Ushmul Amar Lo Yadana Ma'idin Ba, we don't know what to do with this gift that someone wants to give away in his deathbed. So now the Gemara explains, Bebei Rav Mishmei Rav Amri. What were they saying in the yeshiva of Rav in the name of Rav? What that means is we give this gift of the person on his deathbed both advantages. The advantage of a man asbari, of a healthy person, and the advantage of a man ashchimera, someone who gives away something on his deathbed, special leniencies that there are, as Rashi right away points out directly across. You don't need to make a kinyan on such a case, because you could give it over without it. So says the Gemara, and the Gemara explains actually, it's like a regular gift. The Rav holds that if they get better, you cannot be chayzer. That when a regular healthy person gives something away, you can't say I want it back. No backsies. And that whatever he says goes. So the Gemara proves that what's the reason that Rav says that in this case is Archevei Avtrei Rachshi? What's the reason that Rav says that it goes basar both a healthy person's gift and a dead person's gift? The reason is why? Because we go into his das and we figure out exactly what we want. So proves the Gemara that Rav obviously also is like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, that we go into the person's mind. So the Gemara says, you just proved me that it's only Rav Nasan. It's not true. 3 lines to the bottom, it explains the Gemara further. Shmuel Amar Lo Yadana Ma'idin, but we don't know what to do with this case. Why? Because maybe this person on his deathbed really only has intent to give away the item with a document, and there is no such item. So for a moment, we're going to turn over to tomorrow's daf of Daf Navav and Aleph, but the Gemara just proved that not only does Rav Nasan hold like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, but rather even Rav holds like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, that we do go into the mindset of a person. So we're back to square one. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah that holds like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, that we go into the mindset of the person? So the Gemara says, really, says the Gemara, as Rashi speaks out so eloquently, both Rav and Rav Nasan hold, we go after Namdana, we evaluate the person's intent. So man, Damar Lacha, according to the one that says we possibly go Rav Elazar ben Azariah Shapir, that's great, because now both Rav and Rav Nasan are going like Rav Elazar ben Azariah. However, mandamar ein halacha. So why would you not paskin like Rav Elazar ben Azariah? If both Rav and Rav Nosson are saying like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, why would we not paskin like him? Explains the Gemara. Chinami omdin daitayu mishamekruve daitahu v'ha'ekruve ledaita. Says the Gemara. We started off in explaining that why is this husband writing such a big ksuba to his wife? The reason is because he wants to do nisuin, he wants to do chuppah, he wants to consummate the marriage. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you exact opposite svara. I'll tell you an omdana that he really wants to give her everything, even after Erusin. What's the svara? The svara is that Kruvelei Daita, he's so happy to be engaged to this woman, he wants to form a close relationship with her, he has close feelings to her, and that's the reason. So once we have a svara, that even within his omdana, even within his mindset, it might be after Erusin, it can make sense that we do not pass like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, rather we would pass like the Tanakama, that if the husband dies or divorces her, even after Erusin, she would get even the additional parts of the ksuba, even though it was only after Erusin. Just to conclude, it's a bunch of lines, but it's really just reading. Yosef Rav Chanina Kamed Rav Yanai. So Rav Chanina was in front of Rav Yanai. V'kamer Loch Rav ben Azariah. That's how he passed. Amar Lei Rav Yanai said, "Poi kari karach lebra. Get out of here. Why? Because ain't a Loch Rav ben Azariah. We don't pass that way." Amar Vizabar Avdim Misham Rabbeinu. Yes, a Loch Rav ben Azariah. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Yes, a Loch Rav ben Azariah. For Rav Nachman Didei Amar. No, ain't a Loch Rav ben Azariah. Nardai Mishmei Rav Nachman Amar. Yes, a Loch Rav ben Azariah. V'havagav Delat Rav Nachman. V'amar, even though Rav Nachman cursed and said, "Called the Yana the Don Rav ben Azariah Hachi V'Hachi Te'ave." Even though Rav Nachman gave a curse, and he said, whoever passed like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, such and such, he said terrible things should befall them. Afilu hachi, we conclude, halachik Rav Elazar ben Azariah. But halacha lamaisa says the Gemara, we indeed paskin like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, which is what? That only if they did nisuin would the woman get the Tosefos, all the additions that he wrote into the Kesuba. I'll pick it up from the reference of Daf Nun Vav in tomorrow's Shir B'siyata Dishmaya.